welcome to our panel discussion on Four Paths to Sanctuary. My name is Veena Rao, and I'm the author of Purple Lotus. And I'm very, very excited to moderate this discussion today because the three other authors on this panel are my friends, and I love collaborating with them. And we also share the same incredible publisher, She Writes Press. So more information about us and our books is on the exhibit link to your left, where you can find author bios, links to our website, links to where you can buy our books, and you can also download an excerpt from our books. If you have any questions for our panelists, please drop them in the chat window below the screen. And I hope you have a lot of questions. So we'll begin with a quick reading, and then we'll have plenty of time for a Q&A session. Before we begin, on behalf of our panel, a big thank you to Anand Chaturvedi of Eventkind for hosting us. Eventkind is a wonderful virtual platform for all kinds of events, conferences, job fairs, networking events, trade shows, workshops, family events, and of course, author events. Do consider Eventkind for your next event. So let's begin. Please welcome our award-winning authors to your screen. Cindy Rasico, author of Finding Venerable Mother. Hi, Cindy.
Hi.
Judith Teitelman, author of Guest House for Ganesha.
Hello.
And Anika Rana, author of Wild Boar in the Cane Field.
Thank you.
And now it gives me great pleasure to invite Judith to get the discussion started. Take it away, Judith.
Thank you so much, Veena. Thank you for the lovely introduction. I'm so very pleased to be here today with all of you. I'm Judith Teitelman, author of Guest House for Ganesha, which is a magical realist tale of love, loss, and spirit reclaimed. This is my debut novel. By profession, I've been an arts management consultant, facilitator, and educator for nearly 40 years. To introduce our discussion, I want to begin by saying that the search for sanctuary, safe haven, elsewhere is not uncommon throughout time, history, and geography, most especially during uncertain times like ours, or when one experiences a dramatic or traumatic event. We four authors, all published by She Writes Press, as Veena noted, have books that share this theme and have come together to discuss the unique paths we chose for our characters to find sanctuary. So my novel, although fiction, was inspired by a real life event that informed my fictional protagonist Esther's search for elsewhere. My novel's tagline essentially sums it up. Left at the altar, spurned, what does that do to a young woman's heart, and why would a Hindu god care? The significant spark that conceived the gist of this story was finding out at the family lunch following my maternal grandmother's funeral that she had been abandoned at the altar by her beloved when she was only 17 years old. I knew my grandmother as a mean-spirited, bordering on nasty woman. It was always difficult and unpleasant to be around her. And trying to be understanding, I attributed that her experiences during World War II, losing most of her family, having to give up 2 daughters, leave her husband and home, struggle to survive, etc., had hardened her irreparably. But no, it had been love. More precisely, lost love, devastated love, abandoned love. Something most of us experience at one time or another. And this had made her callous, unyielding, relentless, and self-absorbed the rest of her life. This experience informed all of her actions, yet also, and most importantly, it made her a survivor. I was inspired to take this kernel and explore the concept in depth, and thus Guest House for Ganesha came into being. I'm pleased to share the opening pages of my novel to give you a taste of the story's unfolding. Chapter 1. Esther Grunspan arrived in Köln with a hardened heart as her sole luggage. An uncommonly sweltering September day was her welcome, as well as a language that sounded like her native Yiddish, yet foreign in structure and comprehension. A formidable determination guided her actions. Stancia, ik darf a stancia. Lodging. I need lodging, Esther demanded of the first person in uniform that crossed her path. Wo kann ich absun stancia? Where can I find lodging? Her articulation was clear and direct, emphatic. Quizzical, the man's eyes skimmed this plain-faced young woman from her faded long-sleeved cotton frock with white rounded collar to her scuffed lace-up shoes. Small in stature, with thick blonde hair pulled away from her face in a tight bun, she was unadorned and clearly out of place. Was? Ich verstehe Sie nicht. I don't understand you, he said, waving her away and pointing towards the train terminal. Without a note of thanks, Esther headed in the direction he indicated. Once inside the terminal, she strode through the cavernous building to consider every booth, kiosk, and stand until she found a corner counter with a large sign overhead announcing Informationen. This was close enough to the Yiddish Informatia for Esther to push her way to the front of the line, disregarding the glares and loud protests of those in her way. She paid them no heed. Patience was no longer a part of her framework. It had been displaced by entitlement and self-preservation. The recent devastating turn of events, Tadeus's actions, his rejection, and such a public spurn of her, of them, of all their plans, had shaped an impossibly conceived scenario. Esther's one priority now was Esther. She repeated her request to the man behind the counter 3 times. Each time she enunciated every syllable more precisely, then more slowly, but colored by rising frustration. The official, while clearly annoyed, noticed her youth and asked, "Wie alt sind Sie?" Alt, Esther thought quickly, alt, old, just like in my language. Although the other words made no sense, she correctly assumed he was asking her age. "Siebzehn," she said. The man shrugged his shoulders, rolled his eyes, and turned to help the person next in line. Esther leaned over and grabbed the pen at his desk. In clear, thick lettering, she wrote the numbers 1 and 7 on her palm. Standing on the tips of her shoes, she stretched her left arm high and held it up close to his face. With a snort, he reached into a pile under his desk and thrust a piece of paper in Esther's expectant hands. She looked intently at the page's Gothic script and line drawing of the building. This must be a place for young people to stay, she deduced, for next to a name and address 16 through 22 was printed. A map of the area with a large X seemed to mark its location. Expressing no appreciation, Esther turned quickly, jostled the 3 people beside her, and ventured out into her first metropolis, a location as far away from all she had ever known as her meager resources enabled. A place with an assurance of anonymity and seclusion. If she could still muster gratitude for anything, it would be for this. Thank you. And now I'm so pleased to introduce Annika Rana, author of Wild Boar in the Cane Field.
Thank you so much, Judith, and welcome everyone. Thank you for being here to hear about Our Paths to Sanctuary. My novel, Wild Boar in the Cane Field, is based on my experiences growing up in the Punjab, divided between India and Pakistan, but the village life, which is familiar to many of that part of the world. And what I would like to share with you is about my main character, Tara, who is found on a train covered in flies, and what happens to her as Bhaga and Safia take her in, and how she finds sanctuary. And for me, sanctuary is a place of peace and hope and safety. And so this baby who is found on a train, how does she find that peace and hope and safety? And she finds it in 4 different ways. She finds it in the places that she stays. For example, in the opening scenes, we see her in the garden, in the village, in the Punjab, where she is making her a garland of chameli flowers to decorate in her hair. And then we find her searching for sanctuary with the people that are around her. Her two adoptive mothers, Bhaga and Bibi Safia, who both take her in and both seem to be caring for her. But the care that she receives is not necessarily the care that she really aspires to. So she goes, she looks for care, she looks for sanctuary in the animals around her. She sees some peace in the buffalo that her young husband cares for and tends to. And she sees peace in the flies that have covered her, surrounded her when she was born, and that will then narrate the story of her life to the reader. So these are key elements of how Tara finds sanctuary or seeks sanctuary. But one of the key moments that I'm sure all of you consider are that there are moments in our lives that are special for us. And they might come unexpected or they might come planned. And so this is the fourth way that young Tara finds her sanctuary in the world that she has grown up in. In the scene that I'd like to share with you from my book, Tara is in her third trimester. She's expecting her first baby. And Amma Bhaga, her adoptive mother, has taken her to see the midwife. And Amma Bhaga, for all her faults, is as caring as she can be, a widow herself. She is trying to convince the midwife that she should show her young adoptive daughter, Tara, and who is now also her daughter-in-law. She's trying to convince the midwife to show her the flower of Maryam, or what is called the flower of Jericho. And this flower is commonly found in both the Middle East and in many Asian countries, and it's used to calm an expectant mother. It has medicinal value, and one of the ways that it calms the young mother or the mother-to-be is if you place this dried flower in water, the unfurling of the flower will make the delivery, will give a bit of ease for the delivery. The water itself is also calming for the mother who is about to deliver. So Tara is yet too early in her pregnancy to really need the flower, but Amma Bhaga feels that this is something that will help her relax. So in the scene that I'm going to share with you from Wild Boar in the Cane Field, Tara is lying on a charpai. She's looking out into the courtyard, and she sees the two young children of the midwife that she has come to visit with Amma Bhaga. I looked at the girl. She was smiling. Even at such a young age, she has learned how to get her way, to get her mother's sympathy. But the midwife knew her daughter, and her tone changed as she addressed her. And you, young woman, I've told you to listen to your brother, respect him, now go. Let me take care of this woman. Is her baby coming out? The girl's voice reminded me of Maria's when I had cared for her at that age, but she was not as innocent. She was trying to charm her mother before she left the room to be with her brother again. Not yet, her mother responded. She has time. Are you going to show her the magic flower? Her daughter smiled. This little girl really knew how to win her mother back. The midwife stroked her daughter's hair and smiled at her. Go. Get me the earthen bowl and fill it with water at the pump. The little girl rushed outside and her brother followed her. He seemed to have forgotten his original anger with his sister and wanted to join her in this fun of the magical flower. This interaction between a mother and her child was entirely different from what I had experienced or seen with Amma Bhaga or Jannat, but it pleased me. I would do the same. I would admonish my children like this, and then I would hug them and make them laugh like the two laughing at the hand pump outside. I could see the children at play from where I lay. The little boy pumped energetically, and his sister stood close to the stream, barely able to hold the water as it splashed everywhere. Her brother, noticing it was too heavy for his sister to carry, took the bowl from her hands and brought it to the doorstep. He stood there, knowing not to cross over it into the room where I lay on the charpai, and his mother took the bowl from him. She placed the shriveled plant into the bowl. Nothing happened. The midwife sensed my impatience. It takes time. Keep looking at the plant. I'm not sure how long it took, but I could hear Bhaga's heavy breathing in the background as each bud of the flower unfurled, spreading the twig into a fully blossomed plant. I might even have dozed off for a while, but I was awoken by the midwife explaining what had happened. You see, the flower will call to your body to open up, to release the new life. The pain will reduce and become a sweet pleasure when you see your baby for the first time. She touched my stomach again and announced, there, even your baby has relaxed as you watch the flower bloom. Thank you so much. And now I'd like to reintroduce you to Veena ji, who has written a story about another Tara. So
Thank you, Anika. Yeah, my Tara is a little different from Anika's Tara. She is an Indian immigrant in Atlanta, like me, in the South, who is trapped in an abusive marriage, but she feels powerless in the face of pressure from her family to make peace with her circumstances, with her destiny. So the story follows Tara, and this is the book, by the way, Purple Lotus. So the story follows Tara as she gradually builds the courage to break free from her abusive husband and to gently rebuild her life and to even find lasting happiness. And she learns to honor her own worth. So I'll be reading the essay that Tara writes for her hometown newspaper, where she is essentially confronting her patriarchal community. And it pretty much summarizes her journey from victim to survivor to change maker. My first act of self-determination at the age of 36 made me a pariah. My crime? I walked out of an abusive, loveless marriage. Up until that point, I was only fodder for gossip. First, because I was not good enough, pretty enough, smart enough, outgoing enough to win a husband in an arranged marriage. And next, because the man who married me abandoned me for 3 years. No reasons were asked of him. It was my fault. I hadn't tried hard enough to be worthy of him. Ours is a culture where a man's word is the word. So when my ex had a change of heart and sent for me, my family only felt relief. I was packed off to the US, no questions asked. I felt relief too, to escape the torment that our society reserves for an abandoned wife. When I landed in America, the land of dreams, I already felt like a zero, my sense of self worth crushed by my own people. It got worse. I was ignored, neglected, denied a wife's place, and yet the onus was on me to try harder to make the marriage work. My ex told me the marriage was a mistake. I begged him not to send me back. If I had returned, they would have branded me an even bigger failure. It escalated to emotional and physical violence, and he was still not answerable to anyone. When he threw me out, I summoned the courage to move on, but my ex had a change of heart and was ready to accept me back. I was told I had no choice but to go back. Good wives make peace with their circumstances. They don't fight their destiny, I was told. They don't put their own happiness before their own family's reputation. Forcing people to get back together does not magically breed love. My ex and I both knew that. There was nothing to bind us together, not love, not affection, not shared interests, not shared dreams. Then something magical happened to me. One day, 5 years into a meaningless, miserable marriage, I realized that I deserved better. When I walked out into the unknown, strangely, I wasn't dying. My spirit was only then finding rebirth. My life in the months that followed was filled with the love and kindness of friends, which was driven by my own courage. I was finally a person with dreams, desires, and many reasons to live. I had finally taken control of my life. Sadly, this basic right is denied to many of us. To the modern day keepers of our traditions, I ask, why is it always the woman who is instructed to try harder to win over her husband, to adjust, to stay silent, to make peace with the injustices she faces? When things go wrong, why can't she turn to her family? If she finally decides to stand up for herself, why does her family not stand with her? Why is the victim victimized even further? Why are no questions asked of the perpetrator? A woman who steps out of line blackens her family honor. She is branded an outcast. There is thrill in dragging a woman's name through the muck by repeating her story to all and sundry. My ex, meanwhile, lives without stigma. I know I will be maligned for one more reason when this essay is published, airing dirty laundry in public. A man can do it with no fear of social censure, safe in the knowledge that even his wife's own family would disown her. I fear censure, for it is but a form of rejection, and I have feared rejection all my life. And yet, I had to tell my version of my story, for this is not my story alone. It is the story of countless other women like me. A feature I did for the Morning Herald with a senior colleague in the late 90s comes to my mind. It was a heartbreaking interview with Kamala, whose alcoholic husband had set her on fire in a drunken rage. Afraid of retribution from her husband and his family in case she survived the burns, Kamala claimed the fire was an accident. The story quickly made national headlines. Public sympathy for Kamala grew into a massive wave, pushing the police into action. The husband was labeled a monster. The law quickly caught up with him, and as far as I know, he's still serving out his life sentence. But not all monsters are egregious. Some stay hidden in plain sight. They wear a normal mask. They don't set you on fire. They crush your spirit slowly until you die every day. The monster is not the perpetrator alone. The ones who breed him, the ones who victimize the victim, the relatives and neighbors and town people who judge unfairly, they are the monsters too. The monster is the anachronistic mindset that needs to change. I was expected to exist for society. I chose to live, to love. I take heart in the knowledge that the monsters around me do not sully me because the names they have for me are not the names I gave myself. Thank you once again for this opportunity. And now it gives me great pleasure to invite our next panelist, Cindy Rasico, author of Finding Venerable Mother.
Thank you. My name is Cindy Rossico. I'm the author of Finding Venerable Mother. And thank you, Judith, for holding it up. A daughter's spiritual quest to Thailand. I would like to start with my definition of sanctuary. For me, sanctuary is that sacred place of belonging that I call home. I had no idea when I moved to Thailand with my then husband and teenage son that I would find sanctuary with a Thai Buddhist nun in an all-female Buddhist monastery. Her name is Venerable Dhammananda Bhikkhuni. I first heard her speak at a conference in Bangkok soon after we arrived. You know, I was feeling very alone because we had just moved from our home in Northern California. I had quit my part-time job. We had left family and friends. So I was looking for something meaningful to do. I signed up for a conference on aid to women in developing countries and attended an afternoon session called Faith, Feminism, and the Power of Love. Well, in that session, there was about 9 panelists, women from all over the world, and they were discussing the effect of religion on the lives of poor women. Well, 2 Muslim panelists actually got into a debate with one another. They had differing views on the effects of Islam on the lives of poor women. So there was some tension in the room. There had been a heated discussion and a silence followed. And into that silence stepped a tall Thai woman with a shaved head wearing saffron robes and flip-flops. She spoke quietly and calmly and said, "We cannot solve anything with anger. Anger doesn't lead us anywhere. It is much harder to practice loving kindness and compassion. That is the goal of Buddhism." Well, that kind of sent an electric light bulb off in me. I knew that I was really drawn to this woman, to her calm yet strong ways. I wanted to spend time with her, which in fact I did. Over the next 3 years we spent in Thailand, I visited the monastery often. I went on alms round. I interviewed Dhammananda. I attended Buddhist ceremonies at the temple. And she became like a mother to me, and I was like a daughter to her. And her name in Thai is Luang Mei, which is Venerable Mother. So that was her compassion and kindness was a real contrast to my own mother, who was hypercritical, defensive, and judgmental. So a sub-theme of the book, I guess you could say, is healing the mother-daughter relationship. And in that process, Dhammananda nurtured me in a way that my own mother never could. So through her unconditional love, I was able to forgive my mother and come into a deeper acceptance of myself, which brings us back to our theme of finding sanctuary. I found a sacred place of belonging within myself to begin to love, accept, and care for myself. I'm going to move forward and read a small passage, and that is, in every spiritual member, there's like a transformation moment, an aha moment. And that for me came when I was about to have my head shaved. In fact, I had a very kind of a breakthrough, which you'll hear in the writing. And that was what allowed me to come into a deeper relationship, open my heart, and come into a deeper sense of love and concern, both for myself and for other people. So this is about the scene about when I'm about to have my head shaved. The morning preceding our ordination, we prepared to have our heads shaved. I took my place near the end of the line, wearing my white top and skirt. Now that the moment had arrived, I felt removed from it all, as if I were a participant in a scene watching from the sidelines. Part of me wanted to remain invisible so I wouldn't have to feel how nervous I was. It was a way to protect myself in a situation where I felt scared and out of control. I watched as devoted Thai family members began to arrive, mostly mothers and fathers. In keeping with tradition, they had come to honor their daughters. One by one, we made our way to Dhammananda, who sat in a chair under an awning, waiting to receive us. As was customary, she snipped a lock of each woman's hair. As I knelt down at her feet, suddenly and without warning, I began sobbing. The tears streamed down my face. A dam had burst. In that moment, I was a child, Dhammananda's love pouring through me. She gently took my hands, and I buried my head in her hands and kissed them. My heart opened, and I felt immense gratitude for her. Dhammananda gently lifted my face. Excuse me, I have to admit someone. Okay. Snipped a lock of my hair. Cutting hair is getting rid of mental defilement, she whispered. A young Thai woman with short black hair who spoke English quietly approached me. "Are you okay?" she asked. Her kindness overwhelmed me. I nodded, though I made little effort to calm my tears. She took my arm and walked with me, helping me to find my former place in line. Suddenly, an inner voice spoke to me. "Now you are ready to have your head shaved." I felt a renewed strength. I released the fear that had held me back and felt a joy unlike anything I had ever known. In that moment, the world shifted, and I began to look through an expanded lens of life steeped in love and understanding. I rushed back to my room to look at myself in the mirror. I was not startled to see myself with no hair on my head. What surprised me most were my shaved eyebrows. I hadn't expected that and didn't know about it ahead of time. The reflection in the mirror was of a woman I had never seen before. I stood before myself in all my naked presence. All the trappings of my former life vanished. I saw a snowy eagle-like bird with a sharp beak for a nose and white feathered hair, tinged with black patches here and there. In that moment, I felt pure inside and out. The black scum of guilt and shame that had been stuck to my insides was gone. My heart blossomed like a lotus flower. I appreciated myself, a quiet, sensitive, intelligent woman with sharply chiseled features. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. So that went well. So once again, if you'd like to download an excerpt from our books, please click on the exhibit button on the event kind page. And so now we can get on with the Q&A. And also, if you have a question for the panelists, please leave a comment in the chat here or on the page, on the event kind page. Also, so all right, so let's get on with the Q&A. And my first question is, what's your protagonist like and what motivated you to write about her? Cindy?
Yeah, well, my protagonist, since this is a memoir, it's my personal story, is me. And what I wanted to write about was that when we go forward with an open heart, faith, love, and forgiveness is possible. So I had a healing experience with my teacher, and that journey helped me want to influence other people to explore and experience opening of their heart and having the same compassionate experience that I did. I think we all have people in our lives who have helped us in various times in our lives. So it could be a loving aunt, an uncle, a parent, a friend. And we're really interdependent with one another. And the whole message of my book is opening and going forth with awareness and love is the message I want to bring to people. Thank you.
Wonderful. Judith?
Well, I mentioned that my protagonist was sparked by my grandmother, who had been left at the altar, and my protagonist too had been left at the altar. And while it is in no way a memoir or biography, because no one in my family really ever spoke about their stories and their experiences in the war, I did lots and lots of research. And I was most interested in writing about this woman who wasn't necessarily likable and wasn't necessarily easy, but was 100% true to herself. And that no matter what, she needed to survive and she needed to take care of herself. And she needed to go on this journey because she was sparked by an image in a park early on in the book. And the image was Ganesha, and she didn't understand it, but she needed to pursue it. And honestly, I was just fascinated in having her reveal herself to me and not being the easiest person to be with in the room. And that's pretty much the upshot of it.
Anika?
So thank you. Yes, my protagonist is like the young girls that I played with when I was growing up in Pakistan. She's someone who questions the expectations around her and doesn't necessarily take everything the way people want her to. And she's not embarrassed about doing that. She has a mind of her own. Again, like many people, many women, young and not so young, that I have seen who live in villages and make the most of life as it is presented to them. And I was very particular that my protagonist, Tara, is not going to be a victim. She is going to make sure that whatever happens in her life is something that she has thought about. And it might take time, it might take courage, but she has plenty of that. And even though she is deserted as a baby, and even though she knows the patriarchal and feudal expectations, she's going to push back on all of those. And there are going to be times when she's not a likable person, but she knows that being likable does not get what she wants. And so that's what I enjoyed writing about her. I would make her my friend if she actually existed.
Right, right. So our protagonists are very different from each other, right? Cindy, you're the protagonist of your memoir, which is set largely in Thailand. And Judith, your Esther, her story is set against the backdrop of the European Holocaust. And Anika, your Tara, is raised by two mothers in rural Pakistan. Whereas my Tara is an immigrant from India who's trying to find herself in the American South, right? But we all decided that the one theme that connects our four protagonists is that they are all trying to find sanctuary. So what does sanctuary mean to your protagonist? Who wants to go first? Judith?
Sure. For Esther, she was on a quest of safety. She was on a quest of finding herself. And she never probably even knew the word sanctuary, truthfully, but she knew she had to pursue something. She knew she had to take care of herself and be true to herself no matter what. And that no matter the war, no matter her children, no matter anybody or anything, she had to follow this quest, which led her to India. So that may be a little different, but maybe not, just in that it was, I think, to a great extent, all of our characters ultimately honor ourselves, honor our protagonists, honor themselves and are true to themselves.
Right. And Anika?
So Tara, is looking for what she thinks she really needs, is that mother figure. And she feels that in a culture where your identity is based on your lineage, and if you have no family, somehow it's not sure about who you are. So your being is based on the product of the family that you grew up in. And so she doesn't have anyone around, and there are moments where she thinks she needs that. But I don't want to give too much away of as far as what happens and what where she finds that. But what I wanted to investigate is that deeper connection of multi-generational expectation of a mother-daughter relationship, of a daughter becoming a mother, and what happens to a woman when that happens to her, when the role gets changed, and that love that passes from one generation to the next. But also I wanted to celebrate that cultural, very much of a rural, when they say it takes a village, in villages in South Asia, it's the village that makes the person as well. And so I wanted to celebrate that concept of the communal family, and how everyone, sometimes to the disadvantage of the person, but sometimes to the benefit, has something to say about the next person's life. So as far as Tara is concerned and her finding her sanctuary, it's very complicated, but the exposition, the finding of that sanctuary is more of a generational thing than an individual concept.
Right. So finding sanctuary is one of the themes that connected us as authors, right? But do you think our protagonist journeys intersect in other ways as well? I think resilience is a common theme. Can you talk a little bit about that? Cindy?
Yeah, I think in each one of our stories, there was a deepening of the woman's relationship to herself, a coming into an authentic sense of oneself and bringing voice, especially, Veena, I'm thinking of the piece that you read, where we give voice to our inner selves. And that voice, and I want to say that that voice is often, that authentic self has been often necessarily difficult, sometimes difficult to come to with society's expectations and roles. I think in Judith's protagonist is maybe a little different, and she can speak to that. But her journey was different. But I would like to say that although our stories were different, the journey was somewhat similar. And that's the beauty of the theme of finding sanctuary, which I define as that sacred place of belonging that I call home. Each of our characters, I think, came into a deeper awareness of themselves and into their home within themselves.
Right. And my protagonist, Tara, for her, sanctuary is a place within her, where she's comfortable in her skin and she believes in her own worth. So, yes, Cindy, that I agree with that. That's a common theme as well.
I
Yes.
just wanted to point out there's a question in the chat as well, which Cindy
Yes,
has
I'll,
passed.
I'll
Okay,
get, I'll get.
okay.
So from the themes of our books, I think, let's move on to the writing itself. What's your writing process like, or what has it been like? And how do you stay inspired when you write? For me, it has been a very, very messy journey. It took me all of 10 years to get my book, several drafts of it until it was, good enough to be published. So, because I had to teach myself to write fiction. How about you, Cindy?
My writing is a fairly straightforward process. I like to write in the morning. That's when I'm strongest and most, or clearest, I would say. And I usually take the first 2 to 3 hours of every day and have a regular practice. Sometimes nothing comes up. Sometimes it really flows. But I think it's the regularity of sitting in one seat and persevering and staying with it layer after layer until the truth is revealed.
Right, wonderful. Judith?
So I think in my writing style for this book would start with the word resistance. I very much consider myself yet another accidental novelist. I've always been a writer. I've been published in many places in my profession, but I never had any intention or interest in being a creative writer. But the world often has the world often takes you on journeys that you don't anticipate. And in 2001, I was literally dragged into a friend's new writers group on Saturday mornings, and I committed to it, and I showed up every Saturday, but I didn't know while I was there. And then I thought, oh, I have this title. This was about a month or so into the Saturday classes. I have this title. What does this title mean? Guest House for Ganesha. I didn't know. And the long and the short of it is something took me back to a journal that I had in the 80s. And I didn't keep most of my journals. This was one that I did keep, and it was dated June 25th, 1983. Nothing leading up to it, nothing after it. It just said the title is Guest House for Ganesha. So at that point, I had had that title going around in my head for about 18 years. And I just committed. And as soon as I committed, things just started to unfold and I understood it. And from that point forward, I just knew I had to do it. So, and I'm very diligent. Once I know that I have to do something or I commit to something, I do it. But it was a long, long, long journey.
You know, I had a similar journey because I came up with the title first. I had no story, but I just had the title, Purple Lotus. And then I had to commit myself to write a story. So I think our journeys have been similar in that way. What about you, Anika?
I agree. My kind of the title was there, the thought was there. I started by writing, and it took me 4 years to write this novel. And for me, this is the beginning of a longer journey. And I do see there's a question here about a 14-year-old budding writer. I think I was about 15 or 16 when I thought I wanted to write, but I also thought I wanted to experience life before I could actually write something, which was probably a mistake, but that's all right. I'm still alive and I will still write. But like Cindy, I am also an early morning writer. And when I was writing this novel, I remember getting up at around 4 o'clock, making coffee and just sitting there with my, and it was kind of dark in the morning. And it was just a nice place to be, as difficult as some of the scenes were, but it was a world that I was creating. And for those 2 hours before I had to go to work, and that's what everyone says, don't quit your day job. I'm just so glad I didn't. Because it's a fun process to get to know these characters. You don't realize it until you started creating them. Their birthdays, their likes, their dislikes, and so on. So my writing process is probably similar to Cindy's as far as the early morning writing. And sometimes it's just scenes that come to me and I think, oh, I want to be there. I want the story to be in that place. And I definitely wanted to be where there were cane fields. I definitely wanted canals around. So I wanted a kind of ambience. And the only way I could do that is to move out of California mentally early in the morning and be in the Punjab.
Right. So let me take one of the audience questions. My daughter, who is 14, is a budding writer. What is your advice for her as a future writer? Who wants to go first?
I can take it. As I just said, I think it would be good. There are so many opportunities now, more than there were in the past, for putting your word out there, for things like blogging, for finding what is it that you want the world to know. Clearly, if she has those aspirations, that means she has something that she really wants to be heard. And some people write just for themselves, which is also fine. Maybe she's that person that she wants to write journals and keep those journals, which many of us have done. But maybe she wants others to see the world through her eyes. And I feel as writers who have published in a variety of forms that we've all published, that is one of the pleasures of writing something and sharing it with others, because you get the reader then becomes part of your creator in the story. So it really helps build a community like the community we have over worlds that we've created. So I would advise her to write and then decide, is she writing for herself or is she writing for an audience? And if so, connect with other writers. And there are so many opportunities to do that.
You know, that's something I wish I had known earlier. Other fellow writers can do. There's so much you can learn about the writing and publishing process and even marketing your book when you're, in a group. And that's something I wish I had known before my book came out, because I knew no other writer until my book came out. I have never been to any creative writing workshops or any writers groups, nothing. And so, I think there's so much you can learn from other writers. So it's very, very important to have a community. Anybody else? Judith?
I also want to say absolutely, I concur with everything you say. I would suggest she persevere and just keep writing and not stop and not judge herself, but just keep writing and also equally keep reading. Read as much as she possibly can, because one of the best ways to learn about writing is reading.
Yes, and the publishing industry is changing so much, and it's more open to diverse voices, all kinds of voices. So this is a wonderful time to write.
I had another comment. So I know my contact information is available, and I have been a teacher for many years. And one way to connect is connect with other writers. So if your daughter is interested in connecting with me, please reach out to me. And I would love to have a conversation with a 14-year-old about what she wants to write.
It's wonderful. So my next question is kind of related to this one. All four of us published rather late in life. I started to write the first draft of Purple Lotus when I was 40. So what advice would you give older women who want to get their books published? And in your view, does age play a role in the publication process? Cindy?
Well, my my thought about that is that I've always been slow to go. And so what I mean by that is it's taken me a long time to develop as a person, to mature, to hear my own wisdom. And in that in that vein, I'm 70 this year. So I didn't start to write this book until I was probably 68. And I want to say that that was the perfect time for me. I knew that I wanted to say something. I was ready to say it. I had taken other writing classes and been in writing groups, so it wasn't brand new to me. But I did have a developmental editor who happened to be our publisher, the head of our publishing company, Brooke Warner. And we worked pretty quickly. We worked over a period of 9 months. And she would make revisions. I would go back. Some chapters I had like 8 or 10 rewrites on them. But by the end, I had completed my book, and so mine was a fairly like a birth, 9 months. Thank you.
Judith?
I think to some extent, my advice to an older woman would be the same advice that I would give to the 14-year-old, is just keep writing. If it's something you love and you have stories or poetry that you want to get out, persevere and just keep doing it and read as much as you can. And very much likely, as you were saying, Veena, look for a community. And the community, that writers group on Saturday morning, was kind of what kicked me to get this novel into gear that I didn't even know I wanted or needed to write. But it was very much foundational for making it happen.
Absolutely. And Anika, do you have anything?
Yeah, I was going to say everything you do in life comes at a time when it needs to be done. Absolutely. And when there are a lot of stereotypes about writing that I have realized once I started writing that are really just stereotypes. One of the stereotypes, similar to what Judith is saying, is that writing is an isolating process. Really, I mean, as much community as I have built with writers is probably a lot more than I built with my teacher colleagues. Because teaching tended to be a bit more isolating, because you're the person responsible for the classroom and you do connect with other professors and teachers on the way. but it's still your classroom, as opposed to writing, where you have multiple levels of readers and kind of people giving you feedback and so on. So similarly, this concept of writing that needs to be done earlier versus later, I think is somewhat of a misconception. We're living so much longer. We have, we're really starting early here. And I'm not going to tell you my age. No, I can tell you my age. I'm fine. I'm very happy to be 56.
Yeah, in my view, age doesn't really matter because the publishing industry is also changing. There are all kinds of voices. Alka Joshi, if you've read her book, The Henna Artist, it was a runaway bestseller last year, and she was 62 when she, and that's her first book, and she was 62 when it published. So, it doesn't really matter anymore. The only thing I can think of is if I had started writing when I was 20 rather than at 40, I would have had, more books.
Well, you've got another, 60 years to write? I mean,
yes. Well,
I always like to share, I have a very close friend whose mother lived to 111 in 4 months. And she lived very, very well to 111 in 4 months. And she sold Mary Kay Cosmetics up until about 2 weeks before she passed.
Wow.
So according to Mamie, we're all puppies.
Yes.
I also feel as a reader, I do like the mature perspective. I reach out for books where there's a life that is lived that I can engage with in a way that sometimes the younger writer might not be able to share with me. So, just as there are writers at all ages, there are also readers of all ages who are looking for a perspective. And I'll give you an example. And I want to remember the name of the author. She's a Polish author who won a Nobel Prize. She writes about a retired professor in her 60s in Poland, Olga, and I don't remember her last name. Being around that same age group, I want to read more about women of my age group because I want to see how they see the world. And men and people who don't identify with any particular gender. So I want to see more of the world through the eyes of a variety of people.
Absolutely. So why do you think it's necessary to tell more stories highlighting female voices? For me, as an immigrant, I'm interested in stories that highlight female immigrant voices because they are a way to amplify the issues we face, right? Issues like abuse or patriarchy, sexism, racism, and legal issues, language barriers, or just financial dependence on our abuser. All these things limit the choices of immigrant women to change their circumstances. So these are the kind of stories that I like to read as well as write about. But what are your thoughts on this? Who wants to go first? Cindy?
I just want to say it's essential because we are the 51% minority. Women are the majority minority, and our voices, the far-reaching range and types, need to be heard.
I agree with that. And I would say in my own experience as a woman growing up in my family that I was quite silenced and not heard. So perhaps that's why it took me quite a while to come into the point where I could use my voice. But I think that so many women have so many interesting stories to tell. And the more we get those out, the better it is. There was, I believe it was a book by Elizabeth Lesser, Cassandra Speaks, where the whole message of the book was let women be heard and more empower women to use their voices and more stories. So
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Anika, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. we like having conversations as women. We've been doing this for millennia, from the beginning of time. And this is another way to broaden that conversation. And so why not invite others into the fun we're having in talking about the things we talk about?
So let me take a reader's question, viewer's question. This is Jyotsna from NRI Pulse. She is our City News editor. Hi, Jyotsna. Okay, this is for Cindy. You may be able to forgive, but how do you deal with the hurt?
Well, I think that's a good question. Thank you. I think dealing with the hurt was probably a long journey for me. And it didn't, although I wrote at a time in my life where I was ready to reflect, I believe Anika said that things happen for when you're ready. It was not like I ordained with Venerable Dhammananda, meaning I took temporary ordination in 2014. And it was only then that I was ready. And I had been working with my mother in therapy in a variety of ways. So it wasn't like I just knelt before my teacher's feet and had this. I did have an awakening experience, what I call a spiritual transformative moment. But I want to say that a lot of time and hard work, I think, had gone into healing my relationship with my mother through the years. So it wasn't just automatic.
Well, there's another comment from Neera Bell. Wow, 111 years and 4 months and selling Mary Kay cosmetics till the end is inspiring beyond measure. I just want to add here that my adopted mother, Frances West, she does not miss any of my events, virtual events, and I'm sure she's here. Well, not yet. I hope she's on the Eventkind page. She's 98 and still as sharp as ever. Just wanted to add that. In case you're listening, Francis.
It's just a number.
Age is just a number.
I really believe that. And I really believe that the book I wrote, Guest House for Ganesha, I never could have written in the way it deserved to be written until I was the age I was and went through the experiences and journeys in life.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Exactly. So we have time for just one last question. What are your future literary projects? Are you working on a book?
I'll take that one to start off with. I didn't have time to say in my earlier context, but my teacher is the very first ordained Thai Buddhist nun in Thailand. So prior to her, there was no ordained women because Thailand doesn't allow ordination of women. So she's an incredibly, now 18 years after her ordination in 2001, there are 280 ordained women. So I want to write about her and tell the story of her life and ask her for Buddhist lessons, which I'm planning on doing. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to Thailand again to see her and be at the monastery May 7th.
Wonderful. Anika?
Thank you. I have co-founded a blog called The Lism, which is an Urdu word, which means magic. And it's a blog where my sister and I post memories in relation to literature and language, because we're both language teachers, we both studied literature, and we're both teachers. And we invite others to participate. And the only one expectation we have from the people who submit their word is there has to be one other word apart from, in another language apart from English, at least one, if not the whole blog, so long as we understand what it's about. And this is a passion project that I will continue working on. My next novel is called The Sanctuary for Dancing Bears. And it is about a gamer in the region of the Punjab where Alexander the Great brought his army. So that's just the snapshot. I'm still working on it. There will be some video game related magic realism in it as well.
And Judith?
I have a second novel underway called Future Memories, and it's very different than Guest House for Ganesha. However, there will be magical realist elements because there must be, because that's what interests me. But in a nutshell, it's about a relationship with a big city girl and a small town southern boy. But really, what it's about is memory, things that happen to us that we keep with us throughout our lives, no matter how incidental, and those other seemingly more important events that we never think about again, and why that is. And it's all woven throughout.
Wonderful. So there's a question for Anika.
Wait, you didn't say, what is yours?
Yes.
You must answer.
I was trying to get away from answering that. Well, all I know is that my book is set in small town Georgia, and it has an immigrant once again as the protagonist, and also another there are two protagonists. One is an immigrant woman, and the other one is a 70-something Georgia native. That's all I can tell now.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes. So the next question, there's a question here for Anika. What is the reason behind the word Thilism? That word has kind of disappeared in the last few decades.
It has. It's more of a mythological, legendary word, famous mainly in South Asia from Tilism Hushraba, famous Urdu work of magical stories similar to Arabian Nights. And the reason we chose it was that, the Tilism means magic, and it also has this what's the other word for it? It's the combination of magic and chemicals, and the kind of the way people would think of science to some extent back, in previous centuries. So we chose to use this word because of the magic of literature, the magic of memory, and the magic of language. And it all comes together with that one word for us. So that is why we chose it. And yes, it has kind of disappeared, but we would like to bring it back.
Check out the blog, thilism.com. Is that right, Anika?
Correct. Yep, that is the blog. Thank you.
I guess that's all we have time for tonight. There's a comment here from Neera. Thank you. Thank you, dear authors, for candidly sharing your individual journeys to authorship. I'm now motivated to write. Our job is done.
Thank you, everyone.
That's wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you to our wonderful panelists. I think we did well. Thank you all for joining in. Let me remind you to check on the exhibits link to your left, where you will find information about each author and can download excerpts from our books. And if you'd like to order a copy of our books, you can do so at your local bookstore and on Amazon. My immense gratitude on behalf of our panel to Anand Chaturvedi of Eventkind for hosting us. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Namaste.